when I asked you about what book you wanted me to read, right? I think I asked you what was the most meaningful book or one of your favorite books that meant a lot to you. Why is this the book that you picked for me to read?
So I tell my nerdling friends, I'm like, hey, have you read Senlin Ascends? And I hand them this book. And they're like, no. I go, it's great. And more often than not, people pick it up. So I'm the person in your friend group who's like, hey, have you checked this out? Have you checked this out? It's really good. Like I take in a lot of books. I write a newsletter, as you can see in my background. Like, I love me some fantasy books. But this was like the first one I'd read where it wasn't fantasy. So there wasn't like unicorns and stuff. It wasn't science fiction. There was no really advancements of technology that I saw. And there are. So this is more of like a steampunk feel. So the technology is just so what's steampunk? Like steampunk it's just above science fiction. So there's like technology everybody has access to. It's not, it's it mimics what we have today, but in a different form to make it interesting. So like flying ships. Well, that's crazy, right? Well, we have flying ships. I have news for you. We have little airports for them. So they're like, a guy with a hook arm. Well, we have people who have prosthetics. Like, that works out. Like, it's just enough. They put enough polish on it and just make it a little bit much. And then there'll be like outrageous things that look like magic, but very rarely where you're like, oh man, that is. So it's like a nice emergence of science. So it's like in the Venn diagram of science fiction and fantasy, you'll find steampunk. It's a little bit of both, but it makes it more accessible to the reader. So to answer your question, like, I read this because I hadn't seen a character that got lost so quick and had to like climb up and like fix things. And I saw in my own life and in a lot of friends' lives that they had to do the same thing, where it was like, you've been jettisoned into a world. So it's like, oh, this is your first week at college. Oh, I read all the pamphlets and I read their website. I should understand what it is to go to college. Girl, you do not. So I find that this is like, explains what experiential learning is when you are in a new realm, and how someone who has these stakes that are so high, find your wife. You have failed her because he promised her safety. I know the tower.
Yeah.
And that just is blown apart. Like, even he was like, the train, like, I thought people would meet us at the train. No, he's meeting the train full. And there's the other thing is, so there's that. So it's the story of someone who gets lost, has to experience it and get out. Like, it's a labyrinth style book. Like, he doesn't know what the next, and he knows like the title. He goes, oh, the bats are on this floor. End of list.
Yeah. But he doesn't understand what they are.
He does not understand what
Right.
they are. He just sees, it might as well be an org chart. He's like, I don't know what this is.
Right.
So I liked that because I was like, oh, I get this. This is how you navigate a new world you're thrust into, especially when you think you know it, because I've experienced that. Oh, I know how this works. I don't. And I just, at 50 years, I still have that on repeat. Like, I still am like, I know what it takes to be a writer. No, like, I know what it takes to, to whatever it is. I think the human experience is, reading only gets you so far. Asking your friends only gets you so far, but it's the experiential leap of like, oh no, what have I done? Or this was more amazing than I thought it would be, like that sort of stuff. So that's what kind of gripped me. And then on the writing side of it, I just loved his like world building I'm a big Brandon Sanderson fan. Like, you may have heard of him.
Yeah.
Man, like,
from time to time.
I'm like, bro, like, because, I talk to my friends who like read epic fantasy, and they're like, man, they really explained that library, or they really explained, how those trees work. I'm like, well, you're an epic fantasy. Like, you literally know physically, like when you hold the book, you're like, oh, is this a long book? And you're like, bro, like, my shelves have buckled under some Sanderson. They just collapsed because of his pain. But like this, I got so much world out of such little writing that I was like, oh my gosh, like it's very tight. It's very clean. I understand the characters. They all want different things. The quotes in here are just so good. Like I've like highlighted like I should write like look how this is. So I would just
Yeah.
write just in the corners of underlining. I had to stop because I'm like it'll take me a year to write this to read this. If like and my other favorite book, which is the same thing as like The Hobbit, which this gets compared to,
Yeah.
Bilbo's like, I know what an adventure is. I've heard tales. And then he's like, I am killing spiders with a dagger. Like, this is not what I thought it would be. Or almost getting killed by goblins. Spoiler, it's been out. But
Yeah. It's been out a minute.
it's been out a minute. But like, I got that Hobbit feel to this. Like, oh, this poor guy.
Yeah. That's interesting because I've read The Hobbit. I've obviously read Senlin of Sins. And I liked them both. They didn't quite hit me that hard. And that's not what really stood out to me was this idea of somebody but now that you say that, like they're both going into a place where they think they're ready and then they're not. And when you were talking about it, what I'm hearing you say is like, when I go into a situation, I do everything I can to prepare. And that almost makes it like more devastating when you realize you're not prepared.
Yes. Yeah. When you are not prepared, and especially you brag to your friends and family that you're prepared, and your wife you're prepared, and then she doesn't turn to you in disappointment. She disappears. Like he's like the ultimate failure is like presented to him. Like, you dummy. Like you didn't know enough. You didn't and when he looks out and sees everybody is tied together, he's like no one ever mentioned that in the everyday, reader's guide to.
Yeah, because he's carrying around this book that's supposed to be a guide to the Tower of Babel, which he finds out later in the book was written by people that have never stepped foot in the tower.
Right. It was all propaganda. And so then it made me think, like, what have I read in my life and the experts I've listened to that say, you know what, Ryan, this is the way of life. And I go, sounds good to me. And then I just go and I just adhere to it. And I don't trust myself or my own like wisdom. I just go, oh, this is like a book that everyone thinks is right. And then when they follow it, their results or their life is disastrous. Oh, fuck. Like, and if you're like, that never happens, I invite you to look at our landscape.
Yeah, I mean, but I think that's interesting that that's what stood out to you and what draws you to this book, because the book feels like just kind of your typical kind of action. I mean, it's a great book, but it didn't. It feels like on first blush, like it's just kind of a fun steampunky book. So it's that idea of like somebody really preparing for something, stepping into it, and then immediately failing. That's what hits you so hard?
Yeah, that's what hit me so hard. In that, Senlin doesn't have any friends. He's never like, oh, I sure miss Bill. Like, nope. Like, he doesn't have anyone. And so you watch him have to trust and depend on other people to get to the next level.
Oh, and he's inexperienced in that too.
Yes.
Right.
So, he's like, he trusts whoever will get him a little bit further, but he doesn't have the wisdom to be like, where are they taking me? Because he gets set up sometimes where it's like, oh, you're the one that stole from me. And they're like, yeah, sorry about that. Like, that's how it works. Or because he doesn't understand how he thinks, the Tower of Babel is like a good place to hang. And it's not. It's an oppressive world structure of like, hey, it will devour you if you misstep. The tower. And they have like phrases in there where they're like, oh, you know what they say? Tower of Babel, eat your lunch. And then like, you know what I mean? Like they just have axioms of like, it will destroy you. And you're like, oh, and then he has to learn relationships, which again, to me is like, oh, he doesn't even have anyone. So he has to learn who to trust and like how that works. Because at the end, like he's got allies finally where people are like, oh, we'll help you. And he's like, oh, because he helps them. He figured out how to survive as you need. Like the Hods have friends, like he's like, oh, there's connections here. I need to get on that.